again, my name is Laura Stotterman, and I'm here as your dance and visual arts consultant from the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, and we are unpacking the K-12 Create strand. And so I hand it off to my coworker to introduce himself.
Hi, I am Brandon Rader. I am the Music and Theater Arts Consultant for the Department of Public Instruction, and we are led by Dr. Lori Major Carlin, who herself was a theater teacher as well. So these are our session materials today for what we're going to be engaged in today, and Laura will drop into the chat momentarily the actual what's it called?
Link again.
Yeah, thank you so much. If everyone can please double check and make sure that they are muted, that would be great. And then I want to call attention to the fact that when you click on this link or scan this QR code, you're actually going to come to a black background screen that gives you a preview of what it is you're copying. And it's imperative that you actually click on the Use Template button in the upper right-hand corner, and that will create a forced copy. So probably many of you are used to the /copy, the way that Google makes a forced copy for you. This is just another way to do it and allows you to see what it is you are copying before you actually copy it. All right.
All right, so the purpose of our session, well, first, this whole webinar series, of course, is to help you understand the value of our new common framework for the ways that it strengthens arts education and the educator's ability to plan, advocate, and execute instruction. But today specifically, we are unpacking the Create strand. And so that is to assist in preparing educators to implement the Create strand of the 2024 Arts Education Standard Course of Study in dance, music, theater, and in visual arts. Our intended outcomes, we have a little mini lesson for you today that includes the 3 taxonomies that were used to create the 2024 standards. And of course, then to understand the essential questions and enduring understandings of the Create standards and objectives, just as we have in our past webinars, and now to also unpack an example. This professional development is aligned to your standard 3 of your North Carolina teaching standards. You are here to strengthen the content, the knowledge and the content that you teach, aligning your instruction with the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. And so here is our agenda. Again, we will drill down as we have been with our drill down document, taking you deep into the layers of our Create strand. We'll look at that mini lesson, learning of those domains and the taxonomies used in writing the verbs. Then we'll unpack an objective together and finally provide you with resources, and we'll take questions and answers at that time. So please, throughout the webinar, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We may wait until the end so we get through everything to address them. Otherwise, perhaps Brandon and I could answer the questions as we see them coming if we're not speaking, but we will make sure that your questions are answered. So, and then we'll have our next steps.
All right, so just to kick us off today, I want you to imagine yourself back in the day, and you are a student who was out roaming the halls when you weren't supposed to, and you're caught by the dean of students. And he asks you what you're doing, and we have given you 3 choices here to see what it is, how you would react. So do you, A, randomly come up with an excuse? Do you, B, use an excuse that you already had planned before you went out on this little excursion? Or C, do you tweak some excuse that you heard somebody else use recently? Go ahead and write A, B, or C in the chat. Oh, lots of prepared folks.
Yeah.
Got some
Definitely
A's,
the B's.
Lots of B's. Type A folks here. All right, we got 1 C. Ooh, B, 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 B. Such a rule follower, I wouldn't have been in the hall. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, me too. All right. Well, it looks like
I was probably hall monitor.
You were the one out there catching people, right?
Actually, that's no lie.
I love it. I love it. That's great. All right. Well, even though this seems like a fun and silly sort of warm up, the reason we brought it up today, yeah, perfect. D, you're the hall monitor. That's actually a really good segue into this, actually, because we wanted to point out the fact that there are three different types of creation here happening. If you're coming up with an excuse on the spot randomly by yourself, that's improvisation. If you have that plan before you go into the hall and you carefully planned out what you were going to say, that's like planned origination of creating new things. If you're tweaking some sort of excuse that you heard someone else use, that's what we're calling adaptation. And then and our create strand today, our process that we're going to talk about, covers those three types of creation, in addition to needing to talk about how to give credit to somebody when you adapt their work, which is what we're calling the ethics through line. So yeah, that might have been Laura standing in the hallway then making the judgment call, judging other people about whether or not they were doing the right thing. I can definitely see that for you, Laura. All
Oh
right.
my goodness.
So, since we've already built knowledge around the framework, the common framework, and the connect strands in our previous webinars, which, by the way, are archived in our PD catalog, which you can also access through our Arts Ed Hub, and we will talk about that all at the end. We're going to take that deeper look now into the create process.
So as a reminder, what we love so much about this new framework is this alignment when we really understood, no matter what the artistic discipline, all of our students are doing these four core artistic processes, right? They're all connecting to the past, present, future of cultures, societies, themselves, their daily lives, right? And we see then within the create, we know that the creative process is so integral to all of our art forms. How do we then present them? On stage and in productions or in presentations? And then how do we analyze and provide feedback, evaluate, and everything that goes into the response strand? So these, again, are our four core or common artistic processes that we can go to that next slide that we borrowed from the National Coalition for Arts Standards, so that most of our states now are aligning their arts education standards to the National Coalition Arts Standards. And you can see specifically within the create strand that what we did is we took the dance, create and perform and movement skills essential standards from 2010 and the music literacy, the theater communication aesthetic objectives, and the visual arts literacy objectives. And we've now found a home for all of these objectives in our create artistic process strand. Next slide. So as a reminder, our framework looks like this. And so you see the discipline on top. You have then the strand and definition and the essential questions that are listed. The standard verbs show you what the key essential or essence of the verb is for each standard. And then you have your standard text, which shows in pink the nuanced differences in language. But if you don't see pink, then it's all aligned and every discipline has the exact same standard. So let's go ahead and dive a little deeper. So now we're into create. And so today was the first time that we see the nuanced language that's different, and we see this in originate. And so our first standard of the create process is looking at that dance specifically needed to say that dance and movement communicates ideas, experiences, feelings, or images. And then with visual arts, it was really important, especially like as a point of advocacy, that programs need to be able to supply materials for the many different media that is used. And so we wanted to make sure that this language that says that they're creating original visual artworks and ideas for 2D and 3D artwork, including drawing, painting, printmaking, fibers, sculpture, ceramics, and digital media, using tools safely and appropriately. And so those are the two nuanced essential standards that have come in. And then our second verb, which is adapt, you can see now there's no pink highlighting, so every single artistic discipline has the exact same standard, which again is to adapt those original ideas. Okay, next. So we're going to drill down. This is our drill down document. It is available in the AE Hub, and we I've made sure though that we do just take the common language, so the nuanced dance and visual arts standards language will not be seen in this document, but this is what we're now using to show you the strand, the standard, the objective, and the essential questions that were used. So digging into create or diving deeper, we see again what the artistic process is. We have our first verb, which is again, or our standard CR1, which is to create original artistic ideas and work independently and collaboratively. And within that standard, we have two objective through lines. And the first one from K through 12 is going to develop a student's ability to improvise or experiment with original works of art. And then the second through line, which would be the CR 1.2, is looking at how do we create planned original work? What are the processes and steps that go into actually doing that creative process? And then within CR2, which is the adaptation, we're looking at the first objective through line in how students understand to arrange, adapt, or derive work from other artistic ideas. And then the second through line is again that language around copyright and fair use and open source, and how do we make sure that students understand how to share and borrow on ideas ethically and fairly. Next.
All right. So we're going to even zoom in closer. And now this is kind of some of the preview sneak peek of the sort of information you would find in an unpacking document. So our first through line, again, is to improvise or experiment with works of art. And so that essential question is, how does exploration, experimentation, improvisation, and investigation happen in art making? And so our enduring understanding that we developed from that says that exploration, experimentation, and improvisation deepens the ability of artists to develop their creative aesthetic. So without that self-ideation on the fly, students have a harder time being able to create in general. So it's important to have students have the opportunities to experiment and play and mess around and get their hands dirty in our art form in a non-formal way, so that they can take risks, get messy, and make mistakes, to quote the incomparable Miss Frizzle. So the key knowledge and skills within this through line is that we need to teach our students processes for experimentation and improvisation. You know, there are definitely ways that you can teach how to improvise. There are forms, there are structures, there are frameworks to do that sort of thing. Even as simple as teaching yes and, that is a technique or a process for teaching improvisation. We want kids to actually do the thing. So we're not just talking about it, we're not just knowing how to do it, we're actually doing the thing. We are spontaneously creating. And then again, we want to make sure that our visual artists are using both 2D and three-dimensional visual art media, and that our dancers are improvising on ideas, experiences, feelings, or images. All right, y'all, it's going to get kind of messy. Here we go. So this flowchart was created so that Laura and I could process what was happening. In our second through line, our essential question is, how are original works created and documented? Well, we really have two different ideas here. There's the created, and then there's the documented portion of things. In some of our art forms, those are two different ideas. And so we came up with actually, I shouldn't say we came up with. Our standards writing team really teased out two separate ideas for some of our art forms here. Visual arts really leaned in on this idea that unique ideas are actualized by artists through the art making to intentionally fulfill specific purposes. Artists do specific things to meet an end goal, right? And our theater arts and our dance standards writing teams also really followed this idea. Then we also had the second idea from them that was talking about the way in which we record our ideas. So unique ideas are recorded by artists through written, visual, notation, and symbolic documentation. This is really where our music standards writing team landed here. But then both theater and dance knew that they needed to look at the way that they could notate their performing arts routines as well. So if that's a little confusing, I'm hoping the next two will help tease it out. So again, for dance, theater, and visual arts, what our key ideas are here is what are these processes for creating new work? And then actually creating, planning, executing these new works of art, new dances, new scripts, new pieces of art. And then again, we want our visual artists to make sure they're working in 2D and 3D media. In music, dance, and theater, we're really talking about the conventions for documenting ideas. So in music, this is talking about standard notation systems. And yes, I said notation systems because iconography is absolutely valid at certain levels. Writing melodic contours fits here. Using standard Western orchestral notation also fits here, but so does tablature. And so do understanding how to read ukulele chord charts and jazz chord charts. Anything like that would all fit here. Something that's a standardized way for us to pass down musical ideas fits here. Also, the way in which we write scripts falls here. The way in which we draw lighting plots or set plots, how we draw the stage diagrams and where we're going to put everything, creating lighting cue sheets or lighting plots, or being able to document our choreography through either narrative language or through symbolic notation. There are a variety of different ways to approach that, and they're all captured here within this through line. All right, now we're going to move on to adapt.
Great. So now when we're seeing CR2, right, then we're seeing the ways in which artwork is going to be adapted or modified without appropriation, right? And so our enduring understanding is that we need our students to understand that artists balance inspiration and originality with ethics by creatively transforming or adapting other artistic ideas into new works. And our key knowledge and skills are that we want our students to understand the process that is needed for this adaptation, for transcribing, appropriating, or deriving another artist's work, and how they can create and produce adapted work. In our second objective through line, this is now where we're developing the language around the open source and the fair use. And so again, the essential question is, how does an artist protect their work or use another artist's work fairly? And the enduring understanding that we want our students to gain is their respect for originality and ownership of intellectual property is shown through the ethical use of artistic works. And those key knowledge and skills is that what is our ownership and how do we understand it and define it and respect it, and the ethics and legal obligations for using other artists' work, and then how do we have use of free work, like where is that, and that we're able to take or borrow something freely. So in the reflection time, if again you have your reflection journal, it's up there in the chat as well, and you'll create your forced copy template. What do you notice about the content of the create objectives, especially in relation to how they existed in the 2010 essential standards strands that you were used to teaching? So you can take a moment and maybe flood some answers in the chat if you'd just like to contribute them, but this is a time where you will complete this in the reflection journal, and if you're watching this at a later time as well. We have a first response that these strands allow for less Eurocentric teaching, which accounts for more than one way of teaching learning music, as opposed to just traditional staff reading and rhythm work. Excellent. Thank you for that contribution to the chat.
And that certainly reflects feedback we received in both music and dance during the review phase of standards revision. So that's great that you saw that right away.
Again, we'll just give it another minute for you to complete your reflection. But also, if you'd like to add your comment to the chat for us.
All right. Well, if you have anything else, feel free to drop it into the chat, and we will, because we love to hear your thoughts as we go through this. So in the Connect webinar, we did a little mini lesson on the relationship between the standards and the objectives. And in this webinar, we're going to do a different mini lesson. We're going to take a look at the 3 taxonomies that were used in writing the standards, each representing a different domain of learning.
So to start this off, we're going to look actually at an essential standard from 2010 of, I think this is music, right? Music literacy. This is a kindergarten 1.5, which states to illustrate a steady beat. And remember, we talked about the accessible verb, that would be illustrate, and that assessment content is a steady beat. Well, this was problematic. And we'll go to that next slide to understand a little bit more why. Right, so we found through the interviews, the focus groups, the survey feedback, that these verbs that were so heavily dependent on Bloom's taxonomy, they weren't really helpful for the arts as much. They're not really aligned to that activity, and they're not properly scaffolding the activities across the grade levels for our arts disciplines. And we really wanted to see more of that disciplinary language used in our standard objectives. And so our data review committee made the recommendations upon seeing this feedback that the writing teams needed to change the verbs to use more discipline appropriate verbs such as create, compose, draw, present, perform, sing, so on and so forth, to really add more clarity to what it is that we're having our students do and how we're measuring that mastery. So the main question then to the writing team was, or to us really as arts education leadership first, if the SCOS verbs don't come from Bloom's taxonomy, how are we going to guide the writing teams into developing standards aligned assessments?
Well, it turns out that revised Bloom's taxonomy and the cognitive domains are not the only domains of learning, right? We know that there are multiple domains, and so we researched the taxonomies that were best and most appropriate for the performance-based nature of arts education. Because it's not enough to just have the knowledge about art or arts content or history. We are actually developing the skills to do the art skill, and in the process, we're developing attitudes about the arts as well. And so for the cognitive domain, we're sticking with revised Bloom's taxonomy. You'll probably recognize lots of Bloom's verbs or the sort of scaffolding of verbs that fit into Bloom's taxonomy. Within the affective domain, Bloom was actually writing another taxonomy with David Krathwohl. And so we use Krathwohl and Bloom's taxonomy for the affective domain. And for the psychomotor domain, we use Dave and Atkinson. So we're going to take a deeper look at these 3 domains. Cognitive domain, cognitive brain, right? That's the part of our body we're leaning into the most here. These are objectives that deal with the recall or recognition of knowledge and the development of intellectual abilities and skills. So this isn't just, the sort of thing that we know. They're also the sort of skills that we draw upon when we are leaning in on our brain. So in a non-arts sense, this could be being able to say the definition of different words, but then it's also the ability to write a 5-paragraph essay. These sort of things are heavily intellectually based, and so that's Bloom's taxonomy. You probably know Bloom's taxonomy already. Starts with remember, tops out at create. There, of course, are different schools of thought, whether evaluate or create is the top one there, but this is Bloom's taxonomy, the way that we see it most often in the world. So we invite you now to think about your arts education students and your classroom, your context, and fill in the blank. Your arts education students are in the cognitive domain when they articulate that they know what? What sort of content do they articulate that they know when they are within the cognitive domain? You can drop them into the chat and also into your reflection journal. The definition of theater versus drama. Great. Musical terms. Wonderful. What else? The parts or the format of a script. Wonderful. Yep. Keep coming. Instrument families. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I jotted down just a few ideas. Things like art jobs or the history of whatever discipline we're in. Analyzing the structure of musical forms. That is perfect. That's a great example. Yeah. What are the steps of the creative design process? What are the differences between all the elements of art? Thank you, Samantha, for that one. That's fantastic. Or better yet, what are the elements of art and what are the principles of design? Yep. What do each of the notes look like? Great. Wonderful. Being able to say that one's a half note, that one's a middle C. Exactly. Those are wonderful. All right. So we're going to dive into the next domain, which is the affective domain. And these are objectives that emphasize feeling tones or an emotion or the degree of or acceptance of rejection. So if cognitive is brain, affective is heart. And so you might think, well, that's not really the place of school. However, we teach kids to accept things and to model things and to value things all the time. Heck, we try all the time to teach our kids to value practice and to value turning in their work and to value not plagiarizing. These are the sorts of things that are beyond just cognitive or physical. These are values that we're instilling in our students. And so the first level is receiving, just being able to hear what that is like, don't do this or you need to do this. Responding is being able to articulate those sort of things or show that they can comply. The third level is valuing, the fourth level is organizing, and the top level is actually internalizing those values. So we're now going to take a look at 3 different objectives from the new standards, the new objective 2024 Arts Standard Course of Study. The first one, and we're going to identify which one is not the affective domain. The 7th grade Connect example says to identify art skills, characteristics, behaviors that contribute to success in post-secondary education and career readiness. The intermediate one says to evaluate the ethics of making, producing, and distributing both original dance and dances inspired by the ideas of others, including the musical accompaniment. And the 5th grade one says to construct respectful critique of theater work created by self and peers. So which one is not centered? The verb, the accessible verb, is not centered in the affective domain, the affective domain. I keep saying that wrong. We have 1 vote for identify. Anybody else want to weigh in? Another one for identify. Oh, you guys are so stinking smart. Nice. Yep. So because even though we're talking about behaviors here, we're just like naming them. So this is a cognitive activity. But when we're evaluating the ethics, we're really talking about internalizing whether or not something is okay, whether or not this is the right way to do something. And in fifth grade, if this didn't have respectful, I might even say that this is a cognitive activity. But the theater team really felt it was important to introduce this affective element to this and say that we are constructing respectful critiques, not just brutally honest ones, but respectful critiques. They don't have to be nice, but they have to be respectful. Great. So here's the last domain. This is psychomotor. If the cognitive is brain and affective is the heart, psychomotor is the body. These objectives place primary emphasis on neuromuscular or physical skills and involve different degrees of physical dexterity. So this actually represents a vast majority of the objectives within create and present. And you can think of these objectives as the ones that are more of the doing whatever it is. These sorts of objectives also show up in physical education or in the science lab. To know how to titrate is different than actually titrating. We see a lot of these in CTE. We see a lot of these sort of objectives whenever students are asked to demonstrate that they can do something. This got a little complicated. There are lots of taxonomies out there with many different ways to organize different kinds of activities. But we didn't want to just organize them. We wanted them in a hierarchy. So we ended up settling on Dave's stages and then found that Atkinson had transformed Dave's stages into verb form. So instead of just imitation, it was to imitate. And instead of naturalization, it is to embody. So we start with imitation, then we can manipulate the different pieces, then we start to perfect, then we articulating, so really demonstrating with clarity and precision, and then fully embodying whatever it is that we're doing. And that's the way that the psychomotor objectives were written. So I'm going to kick that back to Laura to summarize all of the educationese I just said.
Right. So that was a lot, but hopefully it helps to give a deeper insight into why we're using certain verbs, especially in the create and present strands. So now it's going to be a check for knowledge. Get ready with those reflection journals. But we recap, understanding that knowledge, what students know, that this is the cognitive domain. When we're talking about the physical skills, right, this is psychomotor. And then when we're talking about their attitudes, this is the affective domain. And so in our next slide, we're going to use these same colors or these three domains. And so match the following create examples. Oh, we have examples twice for some reason, but oops, excuse that. The following examples to their domain. And so we have, again, our third grade CR 1.1 standards to improvise movement based on one dance element. Is that cognitive, psychomotor, or the affective domain? Then we have what's called novice. This is a VIM, vocal and instrumental music standard to compose simple original rhythmic ideas using an appropriate standard notation system. Then we have a sixth grade standard to create, this must be theater, to create simple costumes or masks for dramatic presentations. Then we have a beginning music standard to arrange an existing musical work, changing 3 or more musical elements. And then we have another one that is actually going to be across all artistic disciplines, and it will read the same. Evaluate the ethics of making, producing, and distributing both original and derivative art. And so go ahead and you can give it an A, B, C, a 1, 2, 3, but we're going to show you the colors that match it up. Some people are putting things into the chat already.
And I just wanted to point out that this actually represents the 5 different through lines of create here.
All right, so let's go ahead in a minute and we'll give you our answers. All right, so with that third grade, when we are improvising movement, we are doing our improvisation is that embodiment. And so this is our psychomotor. In our second novice objective, we are composing. Therefore, it is a cognitive. You're applying those skills in what the student knows. In the CR 1.3, when we're creating those simple costumes, we're again hands-on. We're in the make. We're doing. So this is more of psychomotor. And in our beginning level music, this again is going back into our cognitive domain. And then when we look into this, the affective domain of how we are evaluating the ethics. And again, that is the standard that is shared across all 4 artistic disciplines.
So I just want to,
hopefully you followed along with us. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I see that Tiffany pointed out that the cognitive ones that are the ones we labeled cognitive are cognitive and psychomotor. And I totally get that, because you can't necessarily compose or arrange something without having the gross motor skills or the fine motor skills to write the music or whatever it is. But I would say that the task itself falls within the taxonomy of the cognitive domain. So totally get that. And you're 100% on the right track. It's really hard to actually do any of these things without some element of using our body, because even when we articulate anything, we're manipulating our mouths. So it's always something that I struggle with, and just wanted to say, if you were struggling with that as well, I always try to take the way that we are demonstrating it, especially if it's pen and paper, out of it in order to choose.
All right, so now we're going to unpack a few objectives for you. So let's go into our next slide.
Oh, that's me. Wonderful. So
It
this is CR 2.2, which is all about ethics. And so we see here that we have a fairly similar objective across all disciplines: general music, vocal and instrumental music, dance, theater. Technical theaters is very similar as well. Visual arts, they all are basically the same thing. You see that it changes musicians to dancers to thespians to artists. And we all kind of talk about the way that we adapt things differently. In music, we can transcribe or arrange. In visual art, they use the word more of arrange or derive. So we strove to actually use the discipline-specific language in each one of these. So you can see the common kind of reduction there in this lovely purpley pink wine color there. And the first thing you'll see in the unpacking is all of the glossary terms. Now, I know you can't see this and that very well, and that's totally fine. I know it's too small. My point is that all of this information is available to you right with this objective when you look it up, so that you don't have to flip through all of the pages of the glossary. After that, we take a look at the essential question and enduring understandings.
Right. So now we will identify for you, what does the student need to have this understanding first of where did it come from before? What knowledge and skills did you start with? And where is it going to go after this? And so how does this objective develop the through line? And this will be provided for every objective in every discipline. And then that enduring understanding, what do we want the students to know? And that is, in this particular case, that respect for originality and ownership of intellectual property, and how that's shown through the ethical use of artistic works. And I think I jumped onto your slide. So did I take that from you?
No, you didn't.
I'm sorry. No. Okay. And again, now we were going to see, well, what do what's that knowledge and skills? How can we check for understanding and mastery? And so the students are going to need to know these definitions, which Brandon had already said will be provided for you in the glossary to help teach students. And so what are those words that we need to define? And then what are the limits for using material covered by these terms? And then the skills that we're mastering in this objective are for the students to be able, when we say describe, we are really saying that the student is able to summarize the effects fair use, copyright, public domain, open source, and Creative Commons have on musicians, right?
Oops.
Because how does it
On
then,
everybody. I
well, it should
forgot
be
to change that.
affect.
It should say
It
all
should
art.
affect all
Yeah.
art, yes. And on all art, right? And so how does that affect the ability of artists to create it? So what is the effect that it has?
All right. So one thing we didn't show you in the Create webinar was the list of possible topics. And we want to stress again that these are possible and not prescripted topics. They're simply a jumping off point to really get you started, make sure that you understand what the aim of the objective was. But we know that there might be more relevant material which comes up over time. So something when we are talking about how these terms affect the ability of artists to create original or adapted works, something like Shepard Fairey versus the Associated Press for Obama's Hope poster might be absolutely perfect, Oh, but it was published in the AP, so can't I use it? Not necessarily, right? Did Ed Sheeran rip off Marvin Gaye? Did Taylor Swift? What about, these other uh, possible topics as well. Laura and I were looking up different dance ones, and Kyle Hanagami has filed a lawsuit against Fortnite for stealing his dance moves and putting them into the game. So these are all kind of beginning points. And of course, with something like this, time will definitely evolve more and more cases that will be more relevant and more interesting, and the students might engage with a little bit more. And so you can use something like this or these ones directly. When we look at the evidence of mastery of this, we look at assessments. And it's really important to focus on the assessable verb here, which of course is describe. And as Laura mentioned earlier, this means that we are asking students to summarize the characteristics of how these terms affect the ability of an artist to create original or adapted works. And they should also be using disciplinary vocabulary within their descriptions. So this assessment example, again, is an example. It's not prescriptive. It might not fit with whatever you chose, but it's definitely something you can riff off of, or something you can use directly or modify slightly or not use at all. It's up to you.
So in these unpacking documents, we will also be identifying things like, well, what remains for the teacher? And so we'll suggest, again, that the teacher has to obviously write their lesson objectives, create the formative assessment, choose classroom activities that are going to support those lesson objectives, and maybe, understand their pacing guide or map their learning activities on a calendar to see how this develops over a unit or over a single lesson. And when we're talking about the lesson objectives, in seeing how it can scaffold, right? First things is that we'll need to understand that students have to be able to describe how can artists create new work based on the work of others, and then do they understand those definitions of copyright and public domain, et cetera? And then are they able to describe how artists can be limited by fair use, copyright, public domain, right? Creative Commons, and then eventually landing on what we're asking the students to do in mastery, which again is describe, right? They'll finally be able to then describe how artists can fairly create new art using works of others covered by fair use, copyright, public domain, open source, and Creative Commons. So reflection time. What new insights have you gained about teaching copyright and ethics from unpacking this objective? Go ahead and write a few things in your reflection journal. Pause the video if you're watching it at a later date, or go ahead and enter into the chat some of your ideas. What new insights have you gained? And it's really about how we unpack, right? So the ways in which we, again, are looking at the objectives, we're looking at the enduring understanding, the key knowledge and skills.
I love these. Actually teaching about it as opposed to having to simply abide by it. Hopefully that'll make, some things easier for teachers to have it part of their culture of their classroom, and showing students examples and non-examples before they begin a project or idea. Yeah, hopefully, if this becomes part of our regular conversation, just like the way that we do things in the arts, any sort of questioning about can you draw Pikachu in order to turn this in? Is it okay to, take pictures and mosaic them? Is it okay to take a song from the radio and arrange it if we're just doing it as a classroom activity versus if we're performing it at a ticketed event? Those sorts of questions are just kind of baked into, or answers are sort of baked into the classroom. I love it, Larry. He says it makes him think of the contextual relevancy strand. So one of the things that we definitely we found was that this topic actually was in some disciplines, but not in all disciplines, even though it's a relevant topic in all disciplines. And it certainly only showed up kind of haphazardly in that one discipline. It was music. So this was something we wanted to bring to everyone because it definitely affects everyone, especially when we're within the sphere of digital sharing. Yeah,
And
real life
remember,
applications.
yeah, and remember about the objectives now is that we are building this content knowledge starting in kindergarten with, when is it okay to copy, or what does it mean to copy another's artwork? And then developing that deeper language and understanding all the way through the 12th grade.
Mhm. Samantha brought up that it's super useful as artificial intelligence is becoming more integrated into our society. I think that's really important to think about what is derivative and what is original. And we are actually the first state in the nation to name artificial intelligence in our objectives. So, yeah, yes. Awesome. All right, so we know that was a ton of information, and we want you to start thinking about any questions you might want to bring up, but I'm going to go through a few resources that we have available to you as you move away from us and into the wonderful world of unpacking these on your own until we release those unpacking documents. The Arts Education Hub, or the External Implementation Guide, is our one-stop shop for all of our resources. So you can even see today's recording will be cataloged under that button right there with the play button that says professional development. You can find this and all of our other professional developments. We have over 55 hours of free professional development within there, in addition to 2 courses about literacy. And you can access this hub at the QR code or at the short link there. And we love to point out that every single discipline, math, science, ELA, social studies, multilingual learners, PE, everybody has a hub just like this where they can find all of their information as well. Absolutely essential to understanding all of the standard course of studies are these resources. There are the glossaries, the crosswalks from our current standards back to the old essential standards to really understand what it is that you used to teach, which you can still teach, perfectly, what needs to be tweaked, what can be combined, what's brand new. Of course, our standards are available. We release those music skill appendices right away. And what we want to highlight are our vertical alignment and our horizontal alignment documents. So our vertical alignment shows one through line. So for example, CR 1.1 is always going to be about improvisation or experimentation. What does CR 1.1 look like from K all the way through advanced? Especially since most of us are teachers of multiple grade levels, we know that that's an important understanding that we need to see how that skill progresses across the 3, 4, or 6 years that we see students. Also, the horizontal alignment document is fantastic. I saw earlier somebody said that this would be an amazing, or the example Unpacking would be amazing to work with a media coordinator. Not only would it be amazing to do that, but you could get all of the arts teachers in the entire school to be working on a similar project at a similar time with the media coordinator, so that everything is aligned. We also love the fact that if you're in a school district that maybe doesn't have dance or theater until secondary or high school, they're still understanding all of these ethical sort of questions. They're tackling them in their other arts disciplines as well. If you want to know when we're doing what, this is going to be your friend. This is our arts education installation timeline. It has a broad view in this this sort of graphic form on the first page, and then it's a little bit more nitty-gritty on the following pages in kind of bullet form. We also want to make sure everybody knows about our whole series here. We have Present, which is our next webinar in December, and Respond in January. And the best way to keep up with all of this knowledge is through the Arts Ed listserv. Whenever we send out any information about the standard course of study and the implementation and the installation activities, it'll come out through the listserv. So do make sure that you are signed up, and anyone else that you know who isn't receiving our information is also signed up.
Great. And we have a few minutes left, and so we'd love to be able to take any of your questions that you have on what we've presented today. So you can go ahead and unmute or throw something into the chat if you have something. And we'd love, again, to be able to continue our dialogue for the next several moments before we say goodbye.
Yes, hello, can everybody hear me?
We
Yes.
can. Thank you for your question.
Okay, yes. Well, well, I actually don't have a question. I actually just have a very quick statement. I just really appreciate what you all are doing um, by simplifying everything. You know, the thing that I detect with this rephrasing of everything is really just to get straight to the point. And I just really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you. I will tell you that that is definitely our goal, is to take away any mystery from the objectives and make it easy to understand exactly how we need to execute this with students. So that's great to hear that. I see that Julie is asking about recommended links for refreshing knowledge of copyright and fair use. So I will say a couple things. First, let me say, we at the Department of Public Instruction are not allowed to endorse any sort of vendor out there who, you know, as like, you should go learn about this. However, I know from conversations that Theater Folk has a module that they have ensured is aligned to our brand new standards, and the Art of Education University also has an entire module about it. They have lots of free articles, Art of Education University, discussing many of these sort of touch points and issues. There are several podcast interviews on that website as well. NCMEA has several things that are archived within their webinars. And in addition, the Unpacking documents should be able to help you with teaching all of this. That is the goal. We also are looking at what we can do to help facilitate this in, webinar format, we are in conversations with Eric over at MTI. He is the, I believe, Mid-Atlantic region for MTI, making sure that he deals with licenses and everything. He luckily lives in Raleigh. We want to get him in. The North Carolina Symphony has a librarian whose job it is to make sure that they follow all the copyright laws and all of the streaming laws and all of those sorts of things whenever they record or present or purchase music. So we have connections with them that we're trying to explore how we can support our teachers. And the North Carolina Museum of Art is already very active with trying to develop resources for teachers around the use of visual arts that align with these sort of limits and ethics and law as well. And we really want to emphasize the fact that we're not asking anyone to take a law class or to teach the law. Really, this is about digital sharing is not really sharing. It's plagiarism, it's giving away. And why is that bad? Because the artist doesn't get compensated. They don't get recognized in a monetary way, which of course reduces their ability to make a living at their art form. And so it's discussing, when is it okay to copy? And when is it not okay to copy? And when are we borrowing? And when are we quoting things? And how is that different even between the different art forms? Laura and I have had long conversations about how stealing is more acceptable in music when you're just performing or you're quoting something that's very different than within the dance world when you perform someone else's moves. And so just having that conversation with our students, that's really where we're at with this strand.
And please be assured, we know Brandon and I are very eager to support the field. And so especially as our unpacking document work winds down and we have these documents ready for you for implementation next year, we'll be looking into how we can continue to build resources to support you. And we already know that this is one, because again, that language and the objectives is the same across all artistic disciplines. Then, this is an opportunity. We can come to the districts, we can do a full day of PD or half day of PD on this type of work. Just any ways that we can continue to strengthen and support you all is our priority. So we understand. We'll be there for you.
I love, Christy, your comment. That's squarely in the affective domain, isn't it? Yeah. All right. Well, we're just going to go ahead and close out. We're doing a modified 3-2-1 today. We want you to help us get the word out about what we're doing and about all of the objectives. So we would like you to write down 3 people that you plan to share this information about. Maybe that's telling or sending them the recording of this or sending them the whole series. Come watch this with me next time. We'd like you to identify 2 different topics that you're excited to teach that land within Create. I love teaching improvisation. If anyone ever wants me to come teach improv to their class, I'll be there. And then 1 more resource that you are going to explore further. So thinking about maybe those glossaries or horizontal, vertical alignment, those sorts of things. What is it that you would like to explore further? Make sure you put these things in your reflection journal. And you're welcome to share some of them in the chat as well. And in 1 more second, I will switch to the survey link. Tiffany, I recognize those names. All right. So our CEU survey is the same. We are keeping it the same as, keeping things consistent as much as possible. Please make sure that you go here and find the Connect webinar. I believe it might be the 3rd option down. Sorry, Create. Yes, Connect is the 2nd one. Create is the 3rd option down. And you can also scan the QR code here. You can come back and click on either the link or the QR code and it will take you there. And we really do want to express our gratitude for taking an hour out of your afternoon and spending it here with us today, nerding out about the new standard courses of study. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, thank you for joining us. And remember, you'll have to then upload the link into the survey of your reflection journal in order to receive your CEU credits. We will stay on for just a few moments if anyone has any other questions. Otherwise, we will be ending the recording and hopefully seeing you next time.